It's chunky. Oh man, here we are, back looking at an 060. Now every layout needs an 060, like every Steam era layout needs an 060. And actually my first 060 was, for the big layout at least, was a British Railways Terrier. It was the Carisbrooke, it's the one in Malachite Green. But then I realised I don't actually have an LNER 060 that works. So, when I then found this one on Hattons, I thought to myself, yeah, why not? Now, initially, I actually offered this up to one of my subscribers, Griffin. However, he said that he was going to pass this up in favour of one of the J50s with lining. So he said I could have it, so I did, and here it is. Now, remember what I told you about the J36 and how maintainable it was? Well, that's this, but times 10. For some reason, this thing, you can take it apart 10 times a day and it'll still run. Asterisks. It will run as well as any 060 on my layout. You know, sometimes it will take the killer and sometimes it will stop. But most of the times it will just keep going because there is a weight in one of the tanks. And I believe it's in this side. Now, about those tanks, this has a horrible DCC fitting experience because those weights in the tanks, they take up physical space, of course, but the space behind them is meant for the decoder. So then what do is you screw out one of the weights and you put the decoder in that hole. But because the decoder I put in this is a Hattons one, and it's not a direct plug, you have to coil it up and stuff it into that little, well, cabin that you just made for it. It's a little cubby. And that does take some fiddling with it because, you know, the wires then tend to go out of the cubby and you have to stuff them in with a screwdriver. It's not the worst, but it is quite fiddly. Now, I bought this secondhand, like I said, so I can't really talk about its, you know, out-of-the-box merits. But this thing just feels solid. And in an age where, you know, Hornby have released the Merchant Navy and the Thompson Pacific, I think that an actual solid locomotive is such a change of pace, and it feels so good. Like, because it's just, you know, a locomotive with slab-sided tanks, you can just lift it up, you know, at any sort of angle, and I would only say that the fiddly parts on this are, I believe these are for the ejectors, and they sometimes, you know, they go behind the step or they go in front of the step, but that's really it. So if that's all that there is to it, then I'll gladly pay that price. And yeah, like, the entire construction is plastic, but does it matter? It's just a nice 060, and because there are so many of these, you know, if you're in the market for an LNER shunting engine, well, technically these are freight engines, but if you're in the market for an LNER 060, I can't recommend these enough. Like, they're temperamental runners. I've heard that some people have troubles with theirs, you know, that it sometimes just doesn't want to run, and they do make, like, a horrible noise when they're running. But again, if that's the price I have to pay for the amount of these that are on the second-hand market, you can easily cop one of these second-hand for like £50, £60, £70, and for this, perfect. Now, this is actually the first time that I've recorded this section, on the desk section, after I did the running session, because usually first I do the first performance test, because this one is second hand, this doesn't need that, so then I film the desk part, and then I film the running around on the big layout, you know, with a train. But because this is second hand, I did the running around thing first, and I think that what's about to happen, what you're about to see, perfectly exemplifies these locos. Like, one moment they'll run just fine, sometimes they'll have, you know, they need a bit of coaxing. But overall, considering that's only sometimes, again, for what it is, I can recommend it. Like, if you want one of these, sure, go ahead. They're like that. They're like the Class 57 that I showed the other time. Like, they are the most steam engine of all time. I'm whelmed. I like this, and that's perfectly fine. Because, like, yeah, I don't really have any complaints about this. Yeah, sometimes it cuts out on the killer, but it's an 060. That was to be expected. I don't really use this for shunting anyway. I use this to run freight trains. So with that in mind, here's what happened when I ran this. Now, of course, this is a second-hand loco, and I've had this for, well, it must be about 2-3 years now, so you know, it's not going to need running in or anything. Stupid me, wrong address. There we go. Now, the smooth startup, that is purely down to the chip that's in this. Like, with, I think the majority of my locos, yeah, they do have a Hattons chip. And this one has its acceleration quite low. I don't know why I did that, because of course that's not really beneficial when you have a shunter on your hands. But with this one, I don't really mind. I don't let it shunt, because people always think that J50s, they're shunters, but really they're freight locos. Like British Railways classified them as 4Fs. Now, you can just see over on your left, you can see the killer. And if it's going a bit slower, sometimes it will stall on the killer, but usually, because of its weight, its sudden stop gives it a slight push, which it actually seems to be in need of right now. And that carries it over the killer. So now I'm going to show you. Now hope that I won't be having egg on my face. Yeah, see? It did it. It just did it. Don't believe you can hear that. But it did slightly stall. Yeah, see, now it stalls. So it's a bit temperamental in that respect. Sometimes it does it, most of the times it doesn't. Let's just wait for this plane overhead to pass. Now, with the plane having passed, I think with this being actually a freight engine, I ought to put it on a short freight train. Oh, let's not have a flying Scotsman here. There. Nice buffering up. That's one of the things this engine does do. Like, when it does pick up, because sometimes it cuts out, it's the nature of an 060. It does perform very smoothly. Now, set the direction. I can't really see it properly on this camera because it's a black loco, of course, but there we go. Let's set it to 13 speed. Well, that was to be expected, of course, but what was that thumping sound? Hang on. Now, this is something you don't usually see, I take it, so I want to know what that knocking was. Now, that's weird. No, I'm not hearing it. Very strange. Okay, now you need a push. Very strange. Oh, now I hear it again. That's weird. I mean, on this side, it's when the coupling rod is at the lower end, physically the lower half of its rotation when it happens. So I'm curious, are the coupling rods bent? Or what else would cause that? Alright, so I've taken off the DCC chip, fitted the blanking plates and held it up to a battery, but it performed fine then, so I generally have no idea what the knocking could then be. Though I do remember this one was sold as being a noisy runner, so perhaps it's a case of that. But I don't think that this is very interesting to watch a locomotive like this, so for the few running shots I have left, I'll just put the hood back on. As luck would have it, my tank engine experience remains far from spotless. I'm still curious to find out what the Accurascale J67 is like, since a pair of them did run in Scotland on the Lauder line. Maybe I will even play with the idea of giving them tenders with pickups. Meanwhile, our J50 has undergone even closer examinations, including taking off the base keeper and complete relubrication. And whilst the axles were a bit sticky, my main hunch is that the motor is slipping in reverse. That exact issue put my Apple Green A2-3 out of commission, as the motor slipped, causing vibrations which in turn made the slide bar disengage, which then promptly snapped when the motor regained grip and the loco shot forward, all within the span of 2 seconds. I don't think such an issue will befall my J50, but it would not be out of character for my experience if the loco was to explode. My recommendation of Hornby's J50 still remains though. It is a simple loco to work on and solid in the hand. They might not be one of Margate's best, but they hold their own amongst contemporary offerings.